You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gilmoss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. Hello everybody and welcome back to Widowed AF. You've got Rosie here and you have a special co-host today. You've got Jonathan back. Hello John, welcome back.
Hi, how you doing?
So I think initially I want to just address the fact that Lou has not been on the pod as much lately. And I wanted to sort of address any concerns that people may have. She is absolutely fine. She's had a few health problems. She's had a gallbladder infection. So it's left her quite poorly and she has been in hospital. She's making a good recovery and she will be back with us soon.
And because I knew that you would be missing her very, very badly, I have requested that she send us a voice note from her hospital bed. And ever the trooper, here she is.
Hello, it's Lulu here. Hope everyone's well. Greetings from the sick bay, which is my local hospital where I've been for almost a week with a gallbladder infection, which has been most delightful. So if you do hear any beeping or noise in the background, it's probably some activity on the wards. Thanks so much for listening to Widowed AF, by the way, guys. I really appreciate it and really appreciate your support. I'll be back with you as soon as I can.
So I know that you will all join me in wishing her lots and lots of love and a swift recovery. And I know that she sends lots of her love to all of you as well. Right. Okay. Admin done. So many of you, or some of you, or one of you may have seen that's been a little bit in the press and on the social medias. How old am I? About the science proving that grief can damage your body as well as your mind. So I want to have a little chat about this. I've actually done a little bit of research. But first of all, let's have a little look back on Sarah's episode, because I'd like to sort of reflect on that a little bit first. John, any takes from that?
It was quite hard to listen to her story, if I'm being honest, because I totally understand like what she went through. Her timeline was a bit more accelerated and maybe a little bit more brutal than mine was. But what she said something that really resounded with me, and I think we posted it as a clip. It was this fact of once someone is diagnosed as terminal and the other person isn't, like your lives are then taking different paths. So how can you help the person who's going to die? Because you don't know what it's like to feel that way. And they can't understand what it's like for you to know that they're going to die, but then have to go and live and look after kids and rebuild your life and everything else. And the way she put it was so beautifully put that it struck me like right in the heart. I was like, that's what I needed to say years ago.
Yeah, we've had a few people say that, haven't we? Because again, it's one of these aspects of grief that we don't talk about very much. And it is the kind of, I don't know, the unspoken things that we all think, or many of us think. I know that, obviously my circumstances were different, but I do remember being quite, I suppose, angry that he had the luxury, I suppose. I mean, you not that I think it's a luxury, but you go to some very odd places and, how dare he have the luxury of dying, leaving me to deal with all the shit that was left behind. I suppose the idea that you've set off on this path together and you've created a life together. Many of us have had children together. And then their life takes a very dramatic turn one way. But yours doesn't stay on the same path. Of course it doesn't. Like, no. You veer off on a completely new path of your own. And, there's some scary shit on that path. There's some snakes and spiders and creepy bats and stuff that you got to kill. And in the end, the idea is you find your own path and it becomes less scary. And your friends and the people that love you help you. And that was very clear in Sarah, wasn't it? That she's really kind of created a network of support for herself and for other people. There were a couple of real poignant moments in the conversation with her. She was very, very articulate, and I think she spoke almost as fast as me, so we got a lot of information in. But things like having to ration his good times, that really stuck with me. The idea that she was having to say to anybody outside of the children, really, and his friends, you can't come because he only has such a small amount of this good time. Yeah. And that really resonated. I thought, how to actually have to tell people they can't see somebody that's dying because it means that they won't be able to spend time with their children, to have to make that decision, to be the gatekeeper. You know, who in a million years thinks they're going to have to be the gatekeeper of who their spouse gets to spend time with?
Yeah. Well, actually, ironically, when Sarah was ill and she was in hospital for quite a period of time, she quite clearly didn't want everybody to know, because she didn't want so many people coming to see her. But of course, news like this you can't keep. So in a certain way, I had to do the same. But it wasn't rationing our good times. It was just rationing her energy.
Yeah.
Full blown. But I'd completely forgotten about doing all that.
Well, you did. The other thing is, every time we speak to somebody, I'm like, oh my God, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and then you go from almost having to be their carer and, you know, gatekeeping who can have access to them. And then when they die, you then become infantilized. She talks about having to put her dad down as her next of kin. You know, we're grown adults. You become an almost sort of non-person, I suppose. I mean, the other thing she talked about as well, you know, the lack of control, but finding some joy in the last weeks, managing to grab onto the little bits of joy that were there. Yeah, I really enjoy. I always say I enjoy these conversations. Enjoy is probably not the right word. I often feel quite kind of cold and shaky afterwards because I don't know, they're very powerful, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's more that it resonates with others widows. You know, we can relate to some of the things they went through. Obviously, some's different, but there's quite a lot of things that are exactly the same, like the bargaining and and everything else.
The other one was, I don't know how many of you saw the video that we uploaded, and it had Take That song in it. Now, it was one of the songs she gave me as an option to use, and as it happens, it was the song that her daughter was adamant that her dad was going to dance with her at her wedding. And it's one of the things she was absolutely furious about. So her daughter has actually been able to listen to it back, which I thought is a real sign of some progress. And very reminiscent, because I used Rocket Man on the little video I did for Ben's anniversary. Now, you know, so even in the, I'm going to sound absolutely like I'm 90 now, but even like the more modern song that sampled a bit of Rocket Man, that comes on the radio goes off. So I spent so long kind of using this song to make the video that I've desensitized myself, I guess. So yeah, but I off on a tangent there. I don't know even whether we'll leave that into.
Well, actually, ironically as well, is that the Rule the World song was mine and Sarah's first dance song too.
Well, I know, actually, and I did have to say to you, didn't I, are you going to be okay if I use that song? And for anybody that doesn't know John personally, he's quite a rocker, and I think everybody was rather surprised that was your first dance song. The things we do for love, hey?
Yeah.
I will move on to another topic now, but I have a kind of copious notes from Sarah's episode because I was so moved by such a lot of it. And another sentence that she said, which I really, really resonated with me, was, "I miss me and I don't think I'm coming back."
Yeah.
How powerful is that? Because I look back on myself 5 years ago. I look back on myself a year ago, you know, and I don't recognise myself. I really don't. So anyway, I think actually that sort of, you know, this idea that we change so much is quite timely to lead us into talking about this research that's been done. So for anybody that hasn't seen it, okay, it's in the Mail, I know, and it says that the headline is "The Science That Proves Grief Can Damage Your Body as Well as Your Mind." It's the kind of things that you would immediately recognise, which is the lack of self-care. It's very common, and I'm not saying that we're all stinking little honkers. There's been times, but brushing your teeth or making sure that you drink 6 glasses of water a day or eat your 5 pieces of vegetables, or, you know, even remembering to take multivitamins. Those things feel just too much, don't they? And I know personally, I mean, the early days I existed on red wine and Pringles. I mean, I lost weight. I was very pale. I had cold sores, enormous cold sores. I remember that. I was mortified. Like, you know, talk about kick you while you're down, hey? And then I do talk about my drinking quite openly, and I have mentioned it on this podcast. And I don't want anybody to ever feel that I'm in any way saying that you mustn't drink, because moderate drinking, you know, knock yourself out. And let's be honest, even a bit of heavy drinking is, you know, it's in most cases, it's fine. However, when you're bereaved, and particularly if you end up on your own a lot and quite isolated, and I'm thinking here a lot of people who are in lockdown, you know, many of us tend to lean on the bottle. You didn't, did you? You went the other way and you didn't drink.
No, I didn't drink. Yeah, but alcohol has a weird reaction with me, and if I found quite quickly, if I don't sleep well, then dealing with the grief afterwards is just, it's horrendous. So actually doing it with a hangover as well was doubly bad. So, but I had the other vice of smoking. You know,
Yeah,
I
of
went from a
course.
moderate smoker to at one point 60 a day.
60 Jesus. That must have cost you a fortune as well.
I didn't think about it. It was just you know, you sit in the back garden, you've got a bit of space, and it's the escape. It's getting away from things.
Yeah, I get that.
Life.
And even it gives you an excuse to go outside and have a fag, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that. And I mean, for me, it was the endless time. So even just like dealing with the kids and stuff I found it quite overwhelming. And I was very lucky. My parents lived with me for 3 months in my home, and then they rented somewhere locally for a further period of time. So I did have some support. But, you know, you don't want to be calling your mum and dad to come and sit with you every evening. I don't know. And I found alcohol gave me a very instant connection to people, probably too much of an instant connection, in that, you know, I don't know, you perhaps say some things on the internet that you wish you hadn't, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But, you know, the knock-on effect of that meant that I didn't eat very well. I didn't exercise very much.
And also, let's not forget, could you read books or watch TV straight after?
No, of course not.
You were sat in endless nights with nothing to do because you physically couldn't do it.
I genuinely think I have a slight problem. I think it's RSI actually in my right thumb, and I honestly think it stems because it started off around that time, and I genuinely think I used to use my phone almost like an escape. I would just, I mean, you know what it's like. You are inundated with messages, aren't you? Which is wonderful. And whilst nobody does expect you to reply, and I never really felt under pressure to reply, I have to say, I can't sort of blame it. It gave me somewhere to be. We all know how a phone sucks you in, and I could lose hours of my evening in there, especially if I'd had a bottle of wine. You know, get the kids to bed, get on the phone, drink the wine, and then I would either fall asleep on the sofa or I'd drag my, you know, knackered old carcass up to bed at some point. I wouldn't have taken my makeup off if I'd bothered to wear any. And, you know, you get behind with your laundry, and before you know it, your life has spiraled. And so this is the sort of more, I guess, the more known impact, because it's not a surprise to people if that happens. The problem happens, I guess, if it's prolonged. And, you know, very few widows decide to go on massive health kicks in the first year or two of grief. But many of us do further down the line. You know, a year ago, I embarked on counselling. I gave up alcohol. I, you know, took doing things like yoga, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I've even started to meditate. I'm not so accomplished at it. I can only manage 10 minutes, but I think the determination to fix yourself kicks in, and you look around, and particularly for us, we are very aware of how lucky we are. And I realise I'm saying the word lucky about two widows. We both had spouses that we loved and who loved us back. We lived very happy, loving lives. And then our worlds were blown apart. We were then lucky enough to meet each other. And we were friends, which obviously is the starting point, the bedrock. But, you know, what we have now, I'm very grateful for. And it has meant that we can take a little more time and, you know, make some, you know, do some work on ourselves. I'm doing the horrible inverted comma things with my hands there. And I suppose what I'm saying here is don't expect it to happen immediately. You know, if you are a bit of a hot mess for a couple of years, it doesn't last forever.
And I suppose it's the realisation that I came to probably year 3, you know, just after COVID, which is you have to do the head work in order to carry this grief back with me. I know I go on to you about this quite a lot. The only way that you can carry this bag that you have to carry with you for the rest of your life is to put the rest of your baggage in some sort of order so that you can manage to move through. And part of that process alone leads you into meditation, leads you into exercise and eating better.
I mean, anybody you speak to, you talk to recovering addicts, you talk to people who've gone through immense trauma, and there's kind of these pillars, aren't there, that bring you back to health and being well. And it is, you know, you've got to do some exercise. It doesn't have to be vigorous exercise. I realise I loathe running. I loathe body pump. I loathe, what's the thing with the step? But I really like Pilates and yoga, and I really like sticking on my headphones and blasting out some music, or, you know, listening back to the podcast if I'm editing it, and walking the dog. So it's just finding the idea that exercise has to make us thin or make us look better. I think that needs to get in the bin. Exercise needs to make us feel better in our heads and our bodies. So that's, and water and eating well and all the things that you sleep. I mean, you touched on sleep there. Sleep's a massive one. We talk a lot about sleep. I had a prescription of sleeping pills in the early days, and I think it was about 2 weeks. I took them, and then I thought very long and hard about whether to renew the prescription, because I knew it was another crutch. I knew that I have a slightly addictive personality, and I was worried I'd never sleep again, if I'm honest. So neither of us are brilliant sleepers, are we? But
No.
you figure out how to make it work. So I'm just going to come back again to this article. So within this article, it talks about cortisol and adrenaline. So many of you will know that cortisol and adrenaline are the stress hormones, and they trigger a fight or flight response in the body. It makes a lot of sense that in those early days, weeks, and even months, that your cortisol will go through the roof. It means that you are in a constant state of fight or flight. So it means things like your body can't regulate your blood sugar, your metabolic function, and even your memory. So we talk about things, like widow brain, very similar to baby brain. But it is a thing. It is a physiological reaction to this enormous trauma. So what happens then is the adrenaline they can cause things like heart damage. In the interest of science and research, I had my cortisol checked. So as most people know, I'm 5 years widowed. It was a very sudden death, so there was no build up to it. So it's a sort of fairly solid 5-year window of trauma. Guess what? Well, you know. But guess what, everybody else? My cortisol levels were unusually low. So unfortunately, I don't have a very intense breakdown of this. I've asked for one, and I may be able to give people a little bit more information. But from what I can determine, there is a condition called adrenal fatigue. It's not a medically recognised condition, but it's more in the sort of holistic community it's been talked about. And the theory behind it is basically that your adrenal gland, and when you're under enormous stress from something like a bereavement of a child, a spouse, or possibly even a parent, or a very severe illness, you produce so much cortisone for such a prolonged time that you can't produce anymore. You get adrenal fatigue, and that can leave you with anxiety, and it can leave you unable to just sort of cope with, quite what other people wouldn't see as enormous challenges, and it impacts your sleep. And so, there's no cure. It seems to be that you need to get some sunshine, exercise, eat regularly, protein, all the things that we know to do. But it's quite interesting, all this, isn't it? That we know that the mental health impact is enormous. We know this. We know it. We see it. But yeah, the idea that you could then end up getting ill as a result of it.
If you remember, Rose, you had what you thought was a suspected stroke. You were out shopping and you went effectively blind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. I was in Aldi of all places, so it's probably my body going into shock at that. And the light started to flicker a little bit, and like a migraine, the migraine with the lights. I can't remember what it's called. And and I do get the odd migraine, so I assumed it was that. I paid and left, and I got back to the car, and I couldn't open my car. My coordination had all gone, and it was very much on one side of my face felt very numb and like it had dropped. Now, where I was parked, there was a drop-in sort of walk-in health centre not far. Obviously, I was on my own. You're always on your own when stuff goes wrong, right? And I managed to get in, and it was like I was really drunk. I was sort of ricocheting down this road, almost from car to bush. And again, as we do, you start thinking, bloody hell, what are people going to think of me? And I walked into this clinic and staggered in, and I just burst into tears. And I just said to the woman at reception, please help me, because my children will be orphaned if I die. Because all I could think was, I'm having a stroke, I'm having I don't know what I thought was happening, but I know that I was more scared probably than I've ever been in my life. And I wasn't necessarily scared for me. I was scared for those 3 little kids, and I was scared for my mum and dad, because I thought, who's going to tell them? Anyway, clearly I'm alive and I'm fine. They ran an incredible amount of tests on me. They were wonderful. I think perhaps you probably vomited my story onto them as well. And they actually conducted some tests which I wanted done anyway, and I was waiting till I turned 40 till I could have a well woman check. So I didn't fake it, I promise, but it did mean I got things like my liver scanned, and unbelievably it was fine. And I was fine. But reading through this information and all this kind of documentation that's out now, I wonder whether that was just a complete, just a physiological reaction to just untenable amounts of stress and worry.
You said quite an interesting thing as well. Like, when you go to the hospital, you're more concerned about the people you could potentially leave behind. And that probably comes from a place of having lived through that scenario. You can picture and empathise with that scenario more.
Well, yes. And I also am wondering whether the fact that you were, fairly early on in your grief journey, I said journey, meant that you were more susceptible to COVID. Now, this is complete speculation. We have no medical background between us. So, but you weren't at risk. You weren't in the high risk group. You have no underlying medical conditions, yet COVID very nearly killed you. And I do wonder that if all this, this talk about cortisol and how it impacts your immune system, and whether your body just couldn't cope with one more thing.
Who knows? Who knows?
I mean, like I said, this is speculation, but it's something I'm very interested in exploring. And I mean, Lou won't mind me saying this either, but I do wonder, because she's in hospital, as I said earlier, and, it started really from grief because, as she's talked about very openly, I'm not betraying her confidence, she refers to it as the fried chicken years. And she got to a point with her weight where it was basically do or die. So she had this life-saving operation, which was a gastric bypass. And that's obviously led now to a gallbladder infection, which has led to her being in hospital. And then, of course, she has a child. This idea that, if I was, God forbid, to be rushed into hospital, you were, the other one would be there to look after the children. And the same for most couples. And even if you're separated or divorced, there's usually somebody that can rock up and take over. Now, Lou's very lucky. She's got a big family, and they've been absolutely amazing. And a little shout out to the Boast family, because you've been absolute troopers this week. But of course, that does mean that Scarlett's had to go to their houses. They've all got their own children, and it's that kind of, I don't know. It just adds another dimension for poor Lou, who wants to get home and get better. Of course she does, but the need to be with Scarlett to make sure that she's okay. It's just another thing that's taken away from you when you're widowed, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just even having somebody to, bring you some tea and toast in bed when you're feeling crappy, or take the kids out for the day to the park. Maybe you're having a mental health day. We can talk about this. It happens. Sometimes my mental health takes a plummet, and you rally round, don't you? I actually wrote a list of things that would help me in that moment, because in the moment I'm unable to say. And I gave it to you, and you refer to it, don't you? And it's really simple things like make sure I have a drink of water. Because in that moment when you can't care for yourself, because it might be that you're poorly, or it might be that you're mentally poorly. We go into these bits, we come back out again because it all passes. But just we all need to be taken care of, don't we? We all need somebody to look after us.
You lose your safety net, don't you?
Yeah, when the person that's meant to take care of you is taken away from you, who does it? Who looks after you? Anyway, on a slightly lighter note, because I feel like I've just depressed everybody talking about grief and nearly dying. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you are feeling, just really crap and really unwell, and you can't really figure it out, and you're early in your grief, or even if you're late in your grief, it might, firstly, have it looked at, obviously, because it could be something more serious. And, as I said, clearly, I am very much not a doctor. But, it could be something to do with your cortisol. And it might be that you need to kind of put a little plan in place to help yourself manage this. Again, I'm no expert, and I don't claim to be, but all I can tell you is that what works for me is making sure that I sleep, and it might only be 6 hours, but if I can get a good solid 6 hours and not beating myself up when I can't sleep. I used to refer to myself as the Victorian ghost, and I'd sort of waft around, oh God, I can't sleep. Whereas now I make myself a little nest, I take a book, a cup of tea, and just accept that that's what's happening. And again, it's really boring, and I sound, my kids roll their eyes when I do this, but, drink some water, get some exercise, do a little bit of yoga if you can be asked, that sort of thing. Whatever works for you, but you need to carve out time for you, because what you are going through, whether you are a week into widowhood or 10 years into widowhood, you are still dealing with a lot. So I say it all the time, but just be really kind to yourselves. Anyway, on a lighter note, we're going on a little adventure this weekend, aren't we? We're going down to Oxford. It is our friend's 50th birthday, and we're going to meet up with some of our widowed friends. So there'll be a little bit of a group meet-up. And again, talking about the importance of peer support, we live all over the country. From Scotland down to, Kent, Southampton. So we are very widespread. A lot of our communication is done on WhatsApp. Little pockets of us try and meet up where we can, and then periodically we try and get together for a bit of a gathering. And it unfortunately, it does take something like a wedding or a 50th birthday to get everybody together, and even then I don't think we're all going to make it, but I'm hoping that we'll try and get some pictures for you all, and just see that there is real life after loss, and it's not a shitty half life that you think you're going to live, because you think that that's all you've got is this pathetic compensation for the life that you were promised. but it doesn't have to be, does it? You can lead a very good life, and it doesn't mean that you are not honouring your person, and it doesn't mean you're disrespecting them. It means that actually what you were doing is honouring you. And my God, what a privilege to be alive. So I hope you enjoyed a slightly more serious topic for the chat episode. But I think because it's out there and people are starting to talk about it, I think it's a conversation we should be having within our communities. And we normally talk about trumpets and God knows what in these chats. But I felt that it was topical, particularly with one of our tribe being poorly, and also with it being around in the news. I guess we're interested in hearing from anybody that knows a little bit more about this, or anybody that has personal experience of it. This term adrenal fatigue is not a recognised medical condition. It's more of a sort of holistic thought, and perhaps something that we can work on, I don't know, with vitamins and all that sort of stuff. But who knows? It might be a load of hocus pocus, or I don't know. It's kind of dropped onto my radar, and I'm interested in it. On Monday, we have a very lovely guest. We have Laura Clark on. It's another shocker. I'm not going to lie to you. She lost her husband very suddenly, and she got breast cancer. I mean, you couldn't make that up, could you? I won't give any more away now. I'm going to encourage you to have a listen on Monday. And as always, if you would be kind enough to like and subscribe to us, it does push us up the charts a little bit, which makes us feel really special. So thank you, everybody. And thank you again to John for joining me today, so I wasn't on my own.
Thank you.
And we shall see you all next week. Take care of yourselves.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were,